Hi, and welcome to Discovering DataFlex with me, Johan Broddfelt, the show where we dive deeper into application development using the framework DataFlex. And today we're going to look at Git and source control, and we're going to create our first workspace. The reason we want source control is because we want to be able to trace changes in the code, but it's also a really good way of going back and see when was a change introduced to the code and why. And also when you do development and you are not sure that you have changed all the places in the code, you can always go into the Git and check out what changes has been made, and then you can identify perhaps some bugs before it even happens. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into that. And today I'm also going to start with a mistake that I usually make and how to kind of fix it anyway. And the mistake I usually make is that I start with creating a workspace in DataFlex instead of creating a folder and a project in Git before I even start. So we're going to do the same mistake and show you how I work around it. So we're going to create a new workspace, and I'm going to call this workspace Discovering DataFlex Web Demo. And I don't have to type a certain description. This is the place where I'm storing the workspace. So this is the root directory of the workspace. And that is where we want to get our Git repository as well, so we can keep track of the source code. So set manage connections. You can connect to a database. We're not going to do that right now. DataFlex has a internal database that you can use. It is record-based and it's been around for a long time. And nowadays, we recommend using SQL, but you can still use the old database until you're going to do some SQL queries and stuff like that. So we're going to start out with creating a application with a native database because it makes things a lot easier as a beginner, because you don't have to connect to a database and do all those setups. So just take it easy for now. Use the built-in one. So we click next here and finish. And now that we have our workspace, we can set up different types of project in the workspace. We have a Windows project, we have a web desktop project, and a web mobile project. We cannot combine web mobile and web desktop projects in one workspace, but we can actually host both a Windows project and one of those two web projects in the same workspace. Today, I'm going to make a web desktop project. And that is because I believe that's the middle ground between the mobile and the Windows projects. And there are already two great videos on creating mobile web applications. One with Eddy Kleinjan and one with myself. And I have links to both of them in the description here below. So let's start with creating a web project. So we say new. And here you can see we can do some different projects. And we want a desktop web project. And we're just going to leave it default. It's using the default website. We're going to have another episode where we dive deeper into how to set up different websites on the server. But we leave it at that. And there you have it. We're done. We have a web project made in DataFlex, and we can actually run this now. And we get this login screen where we can log in, and we have the application. So why not try to log in? I use admin as a login, and we're going to look at that as well. Right now you have files and views, and there are no views because we haven't created any views. But before we're going to go any further, we're going to start by looking at what's happened here. And here you can see we created a Discovering DataFlex web demo. And in here, we have the different folders created. You have the app HTML folder where all the web stuff is resided. And you have the app source where the source files for the code is. Then you have some bitmaps, you have the data. So we're gonna make some tables, put the database in there, and then you have the programs, and here you actually have the program that will run this application. But now we're gonna look at Git. So let's move over to GitHub. And I already have an account, and I hope you created an account as well. I'm going to start a new repository. We click up here on that icon and create a new repository. And this should be then Discovering DataFlex demo. Did we call it demo or web demo? Web demo. Yes. And we want to make this public because then you can go and just download the code here later on if you like. And we want to add a Git. We want to add a README. You can choose a license. And yeah, you don't have to choose a license. Okay, that's default git ignore. No, we're going to add a different git ignore file. So now we create a repository. And here we got a repository where we want to put our code. And we do that by cloning this project. And there are some different ways of doing that, but I'm going to use the HTTPS. So I copy this path here. Now, there are different tools you can use for managing your Git repository. I use one that's called Fork. You have Source Tree, and there are a bunch of other ones out there that you can use, some for free and some are license paid. You can also use the command prompt where you can write git, and then you can see all the commands you can use. And basically just use commands in the command prompt. If you use some IDE, sometimes there might be integrations with Git. I've heard rumors that we're going to get some kind of Git integration into DataFlex Studio as well, but it's not there at the moment. So looking forward to that. Okay. So we're going to clone this repository, and I'm going to put it in my DataFlex folder, this one. But I cannot do that because it will complain but that there are already files in there. So what we need to do is we need to go in here, rename this, but we cannot do that just now because, as you see, it's being used. If I just write, I'm not allowed because it's being used by another application, and it is actually being used by the Internet Information Service. So what we want to do is we want to go in here and stop the application. This is the DataFlex Web App Server Manager. And as you saw, this is the last button of these three here. And we can go in and try to rename this now. Still not allowed. So we probably need to stop that one as well. And it still doesn't work because I probably need to shut down the studio also. No. So what we actually have to do now is we have to go into the last piece that is using this folder, and that's the default web application in the IIS. So you can just type IIS and open the application. And then you have this default web app and you have our application here. So we actually need to stop the default website as well. Then we can go in and change this to DK. Now we have access to our folder again. And now we want to go back and clone this, but we don't want to put it inside here because the cloning process will actually create that folder for us because it's right here. So we're going to settle for this as the main directory where we're going to put our new folder. So let's do clone. And now it's done. And we have this initial commit. And we have our README file here. And then we go back to our Discovering DataFlex, and we can see we have a Git and we have a README file. So now we want to move our application back into the correct folder. And now you can see if we click here, there are 386 changes. So we have a lot of code that the studio has generated. What we want to do now is we don't want this to be, we don't want to commit everything of this because a lot of this is just standard files or files used by the studio that we don't care about. So that's when the git ignore comes in. And I do have a git ignore, so I'm going to copy that from another project. So this git ignore file you can actually copy and use, if you like, from this repository. If you have something else that I'm missing or there's some additional things that might not need to be here, then we can just update that as well. So what we want to do now is actually see what changes we have left. And I see that we have some code files here. And now it only says 21 because we added this git ignore. So what we're going to do is we're going to stage the git ignore to start with, adding git ignore, and we commit that. Now it's only locally committed. So now I have changes in my code, and I have the git in my local repository. Now we're going to add the rest of these. I can just select all and stage and say initial project creation and add that as well. And now I have no changes in the files, and I can see all, if I make a change, I can see it here. So now we want to move these files up to GitHub because they are still stored locally on our local machine. And you can see in our Git repository, if I rephrase this, there are nothing else than the README file here. So what we do now is we push this. And we go back here and reload the file. And now we can see our different files that are being added. So these are the files that we have in our application now. And you can actually go in here and connect to this Git repository, check out. You can open with GitHub Desktop, or you can download a zip file of my entire workspace that's up here. And if you want to play along with this, this is usually the way to do it. Just go download the entire application using this zip. And you can also do branching. Now I cannot branch my own repository, but then you can add changes and push to me and suggest by giving me a pull requests. Then I get a list here of pull requests where I can see additions that you might have made to the code that you want to add, and then I can add them as well. So let's go back to the code. Now I can open DataFlex, and we're probably gonna start the web application IIS again. And now we can open our workspace, and we have the recent workspaces here, discovering DataFlex demo. So if I now work here and then all of a sudden manage to change something in the code here, I can actually go into my source tree and look at changes. And there are no changes because I need to save this. And then you can see that, oh, I've made a change here. I add an A, and here's an R and an E. And these are changes I don't like. So I can actually discard these lines, and I can actually just discard all the changes. And we are back to the original, and we can go in here and see that the changes I happen to make in the file are gone again. So that's really neat. I think that's all for now. What you can do is you can play around, try to make some changes to the code, and see what happens in your Git repository. Just have fun. And next time we're gonna make some tables to play with. So see you then. Bye bye.